I just picked up this board a couple days ago, the Gigabyte X99 Gaming G1 Wi-Fi. It's quite the long name to say, but anyways, I kind of, before I was buying it, I know it's brand new stuff just about, but I just kind of wanted to see what the UEFI looked like, or the BIOS, whatever you want to call it, and see what it looked like kind of compared to my Maximus 5 formula with the Republic of Gamers BIOS in there. Just wanted to save some cash. This was definitely a lot cheaper than going with the Rampage 5 Extreme, about 150 bucks or something like that less. So what I wanted to do was just make a video going over some of the UEFI there, so you can see what is all going on with it. Here we are in this BIOS here, or UEFI, whatever you want to call it. When you first start it up for the first time, you get brought to this screen right here. This is what they call the startup guide. I guess this would be for people who really don't know a whole lot, but it doesn't make sense to me, because why would you be buying this platform if you don't really know a whole lot? But anyways, it's extremely basic. There's not much to it. Luckily, you don't have to stay in this mode. But you got your system language here. Pretty much the only one I could read would be mine, obviously. We got fast boot, system time. We got boot sequence here, your hard disk order, or whatever it may be. SATA controller. On, off, IDE, HCI, RAID, one of them anyway shows up in here. Security, just administrative password, user passwords, if you're into that sort of thing. Load defaults, and startup options. The startup guide, which is what this one is, that will be checked by default. Mine's not. I prefer classic mode. There's also Smart Tweak HD and just regular Smart Tweak. They're the same thing, just the one's a higher resolution, but they're too slow and unresponsive for my likings. I mean, it works, but it's kind of, the mouse is kind of I'm not a huge fan of it. Classic mode is what I prefer, just the plain old, plain Jane looking. The mouse works fine, keyboard works fine. That's just what I pick. And kind of over here, help, classic mode, save profile, load profile, previous values, optimize defaults, Q flash. That was the very first thing I did, was update my BIOS with the Q flash. Just put the file on a USB drive and boom, took 5 minutes to do, done. Exit, print screen, and another exit, F10 and escape. So what you can do is hit F2, which brings you to classic mode. And here's classic mode. This is what I prefer, just plain Jane, simple, quick, works. Obviously you have a mouse. I still honestly prefer the keyboard. I'm just used to it. It's what I've always used, and dealing with customers' computers, I mean, most of them are old school keyboards. There's no mouse. Well, we got MIT status here, just giving me information about the processor installed, installed memory, and the timings that they're running at, as well as the current frequency, the base clock, memory frequency, mine's at 2400. Cores, I have the 5820K, so I have 6 cores, 12 threads. Yep, my turbo frequency is set to 4500, 4.5. And then the non-turbo is 3300, and there we have our core temps. One thing I noticed is pretty common on pretty much all the computers is your temps will actually kind of rise quite a bit when you're in the BIOS. Actually, when you leave the BIOS, they do drop. Not sure why they're taxing on CPUs, but they are. CPU base clock, I just leave it on auto. I don't touch it. I know if you have 2666, or maybe it's 2800 memory, that'll automatically change that to 125 on you for the strap, but mine is 24. and I just left it there. We got CPU clock ratio here. We put that in there. I'm at 4.5 gigahertz. Go into advanced core settings. Once again, the clock ratio. CPU PLL, filter PLL. I mean, most of the stuff I just leave at auto. The uncore. One thing it did say, overclock configurations, it is recommended to set the uncore ratio equal to or higher than the CPU clock ratio. So therefore, if my CPU is at 45, that should be at 45, according to what it's telling me. But if I do that, it won't post. It won't post if I touch it at all. It must stay on 3.3, the stock, which auto leaves it on 3.3, because I can still see it says 3.3. If I ramp that up any, it fails to post, it'll shut back off and automatically restart, but it'll restart with like standard values, none of the overclock. The overclock settings will be here in the BIOS, but it won't actually load them. Kind of like a fail-safe startup. So I just leave that. And then we got my 6-core turbo. They're all set to 44 or 45. Power limits. I just set it to 300 watts. I don't even think it will go that high. The default is 140 for these chips. The current, I just left that auto. Hyper-threading auto, I want that. Some other thing. Thermal monitoring. Pretty much everything for me is just on auto. Your XMP memory profiles, there's my profile. Profile 1. And multiplier for your memory, which is 24. And that just takes your base clock 100 times 24. Gives you 2400. That is my memory speed. Pretty much when you first boot it up, you're going to be at 2133. I know a lot of people complain, oh, this memory, it's not what it's rated. Well, it pretty much always will load at just the standard 2133 for DDR4, and you have to go in and manually load that XMP profile or put in the correct values manually. The same thing with DDR3, but that was 1333 it would start at. Same thing. Advanced memory settings, extreme profile again, the multiplier again, boot mode, enable fast boot, disable fast boot auto, I just leave it on auto. Enhancement settings, I haven't played around with any of this stuff, I just leave it on normal. It has enhanced performance. It says note may impact overall stability, and there's also enhanced stability, which may impact overall performance, it says. Memory timing mode, auto, manual, advanced manual. I have it all on auto. Sub timings, it's just what the XMP profile loads. I just left them all as is. I haven't even attempted the memory overclock or anything with it at this point. But I can see there are quite a few options to choose there. A, B, C, and D. Let me go back. Advanced voltage settings, power settings, load line calibration. I have it set at high. I think here's another little error they have. It says level 1 will maintain 100% voltage under full load. The problem is there is no level 1. It's turbo, extreme, high, medium, low, standard, normal, and auto. So I think they kind of could use a little update there. No big deal really. I just have it in high, kind of in the middle of the road. Voltage protection, current protection, thermal protection. We got phase control, just how the power phases respond to CPU load. I have it at high performance, which goes up to extreme performance. And then we also have just performance, balanced, mid, light, and then there's auto as well. An S3 save mode. Just have that disabled for me. Here you get into your CPU core voltages. I got VRIN external overrides. once again, auto. The V-core. This is kind of different than other manufacturers. I think they call it like adaptive control it would be. On here it looks to be just normal. And then you go down and set your V-core offset. That's how I prefer to do it, because that way it allows the CPU to kind of downclock when it's not in use and drop your voltage. If you just set a flat out voltage, it's going to stay there 24/7, and you may not need it all the time. So just to save energy, save the life of your CPU, I mean, just better overall. You got to put this on normal. Once that is on normal, it will allow you to enter into this offset. If this actually have a voltage set in here, this will be grayed out and you can't change it. So you pretty much have to go to normal and then do your offset. I have mine at 0.290 volts for my 4.5 overclock. Ring voltage auto, system agent auto, VCC IO auto. I haven't played around with it, don't know what half of it is. Chipset voltage control. Chipset, I just auto once again. And you got your memory voltage, 1.25. I probably actually could go back to 1.2. I did bump it up for some reason. I see I left it there. But the memory is just at standard everything, so I don't think that's really needed. So let's put 1.2 back in there. There we go. DDRVPP voltage, not a clue, no description. Auto, termination auto, DRAM voltage. This is for channels C and D, so you have different voltages for your different pairs. That's just on auto, it's empty, I have nothing in them channels. Again, the same DDRVPP voltage and the termination as well for them channels. We have PC health status here. Pretty much just give me all my voltages, all my readings it's reading. Everything looks to be fine. I can see my 12 volts a little over, my 5 volts just a hair over. CPU temp, system temperatures, fan speed. All good. Miscellaneous settings, PCIe slot configuration. Now this has been bugging me. Why are you doing that to me? There we go. I have two 780s in here. One is in the first slot, one is in the third slot. It likes to randomly pick which card it's going to initialize first, and it's driving me nuts. And in here, I'm in the wrong spot, but just on this issue, sometimes it'll initialize 1, sometimes it'll initialize 3 first, and there's actually a spot where you can specifically set it, and I have it set to initialize 3 first, because when I'm in the operating system, the card in the third slot is marked as the first one. The one in the first slot is actually marked as the second card. So I have it set to do 3 first, and this monitor is in the very first port. This one is, like right now it's correct, but if I turn it off and turn it back on, there's a 50-50 chance it's going to fire up the right screen instead of the center screen. The right screen is actually plugged into the first card on top. And then, I mean, it's not a big deal, but sometimes when Windows loads, my surround and SLI configuration resets, because it likes to frickin' change shit around on me by itself, and then I have to just go through and re-enable it again. I mean, it's just kind of a pain in the ass. It doesn't do it every time. I'd say once every half a dozen times I restart it, boom, it's all reset and I have to redo it again. And I'm sure it's because it's initializing the 2 cards randomly 50-50, however it feels like it. I've never seen that before. It's very, very strange. I didn't have that problem with my Asus board. But this one, I definitely do. But anyways, Gen 3, obviously it's just on auto by default, but I just set it to Gen 3. 3D Mark 01 enhancement. I disabled. I don't even use that. I don't care. We'll go over to system information here. You can see we've got the X99 gaming, G-Phone Wi-Fi, the BIOS, the F8C, which is the newest one as of now. There's a release 9/18. The 16 gigs of memory, the time, and yeah, we go over to BIOS features. And we have boot option 1, which is the Windows Boot Manager. Boot option 2 would be my just a green terabyte hard drive that's in there. Obviously your boot priorities here where you go through and set. I mean, pretty typical standard things. Number lock, boot up state on, full screen logo enabled. I'll probably actually disable that pretty soon. SATA support, VGA support, USB support, pretty much everything you want to support when you're doing a fast boot. It boots up hella fast anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Windows 8 features, you do need to set this to Windows 8 if you wanted to take advantage of the UEFI. If you just leave it by default, I think it says Other OS, yeah, then you won't get a UEFI boot. That is, as well, makes it quicker. LAN PXE boot option, I may enable that because I do use that once in a while. I have a PXE server in the other room in the server rack. We got secure boot disabled. Administrator password, user password, I don't have any. Peripherals, here it is, initial display output, PCI slot 1. Problem is it doesn't listen. Because it was on PCI slot 1, but I noticed it kept initializing 3 half the time, so I'm like, okay, let's try 3 then. It made no difference. It still does 1 half the time. So whatever you put there, it doesn't care. It doesn't listen. That's pretty much my big complaint with this. Onboard LAN controller, the audio LED, that's the red audio on the board, as well as the I/O backplate on the back kind of lights up like a bluish white. I have a pulse mode, and you can turn the lights off still, where they're just always on. Beat mode, where they will kind of flash to the beat of your music or game or whatever you may have. Or pulse mode. One thing I noticed with pulse mode, it actually pulses my system. The power on light will pulse along with it from the case, so that's cool. But when it's on beat mode, it just stays on. That won't beat. But the pulse mode, it does. Here's the rear panel LED. That's on. I turned it on. Sure, why not? Legacy USB, XHCI handoffs, EHCI handoff, USB storage devices. That's just my card reader. A KVM switch, and here is the Intel Ethernet connection. Link speed, audio negotiated, Wake on LAN. I'm very happy about Wake on LAN because that actually works for me now. My Maximus 5 formula. I could not ever get it to work, no matter what I did. There were a couple settings in there. Everything was set to enable. Yes, do it. It would never respond and never turn on. But I tried this. Works perfect. So that makes me happy. Just some more MAC address information, connected, all that good stuff. Then we go to the chipset here. Here's our SATA configuration. That one is ports 0, 1, 2, 3. I think it's just down because it's 4, I believe. Yeah. I only have one drive plugged in. I set the AHCI mode. I think that's what it was by default. And then we just have SATA configuration, which is kind of the main one here. This one will be in RAID, but I had another SSD that crapped out on me, so I have to get that one replaced. And then I will be back in RAID again. But for now, I'm rocking a single Vertex 460. I will never go with OCZ again. Huge pieces of shit, is what I have to say. 2 drives, both failed in about 3 weeks of each other, and they were only a year old. So throwing a 5-year warranty on them, yeah, they're not even worthy of it, not even close. XHCI mode, audio controller. PCI HDMI, PCH internal LAN, wake on LAN again enabled. Intel VT, the VTD, it's disabled. That is a very handy feature if you're going to run something like ESXi on here. Actually be able to pass through supporting hardware. It's awesome. I use it on one of my servers running a FreeNAS box, which is an ESXi. It allows me to pass on an LSI RAID controller as well as an Ethernet port. So there's no virtualization with the drives, which is very, very good, because if something happens to the actual ESXi itself, I could have major issues with all my data on there. But having it pass through, it's not virtualized, it's direct, pretty much direct access to it. I won't be using that on here, so it's off. Execute disable bit enabled by default. Go to power management, AC back by default. I believe it's always on. I set it to memory, so if the power goes out, it's going to remember its last state. If it was off, it's going to stay off. If it was on and the power went out, power comes back on, it will turn back on. That's what I prefer. Power on my keyboard, I do have that set. I just type in, I actually haven't tried it if it worked. It never worked on my Asus board. Maybe it will with this one. I didn't try it. Power on my mouse. USB DAC power enabled, resume by alarm, disabled. Then we get our typical save and exit here, exit without, load optimize, boot override, handy sometimes if you want to boot from a different drive. Save profiles, and they give you plenty of profiles here. I have one stock before I did anything, and the rest are empty. You can even save the profile to an external drive, which is pretty cool. And same thing with load profile, exact same thing, you're just loading it. And it looks here we have the successful boot record. So if you kind of have issues, you can kind of load settings from previously, kind of remembers that, knows if it was successful or not. So that could be a handy feature. Even though if you do have problems, which I did, it automatically shuts off, turns back on, and loads kind of in a safe mode by its own. And then you can make any changes you need. But that is pretty much the standard mode. There is one more, which is the Smart Tweak mode, and I will go there. Alright, now on to the Smart Tweak mode. We press F2, pretty much F2 will just switch between all the different modes. This goes to the graphical one, but it's too slow and laggy for my likings. I'm not a huge fan of it. Some may like it, I just don't. Personal preference. Kind of gives you all your readings on the side. That's kind of cool. I mean, same thing on the other side. There's some basic system status here. Core frequencies, ratios, voltages. As you can hear, it says my V core is pretty high, but actually when it's under a load in the operating system, it's nowhere near that. Yeah, I didn't really use this a whole lot, but we got our CPU-based clock, which for me is just auto. CPU upgrade, core ratio 45, extreme memory profile again, advanced settings, and here's the same thing again. The PLLs, uncore, gotta figure out what that is. Different turbo ratios, hyper-threading, I mean all the same stuff really. Same thing in the memory. Channel A, channel B, channel C, channel D timings. I mean that's kind of beneficial. I mean I like how it's all tabbed on the top, so you can kind of switch between them easily rather than having to go back and select a different one. So that is definitely a nice plus. Voltage control, same thing. I mean, it's all the same options, just a different layout. And my mouse actually does seem to be doing a pretty good job now. I know when I just set this up yesterday, it was terrible, but now it's fine. Maybe it was after I did a BIOS update. So no, it's not bad. PCIE slot configuration, health statuses, our settings, home, standard, your name. All you can actually set your own tabs up here, so any frequent things that you would visit or change or monitor frequently, you can actually, here we go, yep, you kind of make your own customized pages with everything that you want, kind of organized in the order you want. And then our save and exit. We even have our little easy calendar to select the date and our time. Yeah, pretty cool. And back to F2. Brings us back to the startup guide. F2 back to the standard. And F2 back to the tweak or whatever they call it. Yeah, that should pretty much cover it. I mean, I'm pretty happy with it. I mean, it definitely doesn't have as many settings as like the Asus board does. But at the same time, I don't know what 80% of the stuff does anyway, so I never touched it anyways. I figured most of the people out there are probably the exact same boat. So really, it's just bragging rights, really. I mean, if you're not going to use it or take advantage of it, it really makes no difference. And I prefer to save the $150 and put it towards something else. But anyways, thanks for watching.